preparing now. Give me 1 second. Okay, we're in good shape. Everything is started. I think we are good. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Steven, for doing another edition of Tech School. I feel like it's really nice that other people see what we do internally for Fokcus, by we teaching each other like new concepts, and I think that's been great. And then Professor Clarke having his knowledge. We just finished doing before Tech School. Stuart even knows this. Before Tech School, we always go and help with the startups in our cohort, and we kind of do these. Think of it like we call it city highlights. City highlights is kind of like where we have it, where we highlight the best startups in each city, and we usually always do it at in person. We do it at university, or we do it at Apple retail, or things of that nature. But we've been doing it all online, and it's been still really fun. We'll see what that looks like in the future, but we just finished having a real good session. So I think I feel like I've learned a lot today already. As everyone knows, Steven's he's head of our advanced technology team. He's also a really great teacher. He has a lot of expertise in different aspects of technology, which I think was always really your little superpower on that, from AI to machine learning. Also alumni of Linfield College. Is anybody out there in Oregon, and the school that we both went to, USC, for computer science. So thanks, Steven, for coming on offhand. We have Sam Clarke too. Sam, experienced partner, demonstrating all types of interesting concepts and innovation and to entrepreneurship, even help with a lot of different venture-backed startups too, but skilled in business planning and sales and management, really solid in finance. We always talk about finance all the time, and really great with this kind of mindset of entrepreneurship. He has a doctor of philosophy, focused on entrepreneurship and business strategy from the University of Hawaii, and he's also a professor, and he's the head of the innovation hub at Cal State San Marcos. So thank you guys both for coming, talking about momentum. And I think we're going to start off with your kind of presentation first, right, Steven?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Give me a second here.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so I'm going to do a little presentation on the topic of momentum here. Hopefully that'll set the stage for Sam Clarke later on, and then any Q&A you guys have. So hopefully you guys can walk away from this, maybe having learned something, maybe spark some insight, or gain something valuable from listening in today.
And Steven, would you want to have people, as we do before, like type in their questions while you're talking into the Zoom chat?
Sure, yeah. If you guys have questions, feel free to type them into the Zoom chat, and we can, stop periodically. We can answer those. So if you guys, if something sparks your interest, or something, you find curious, and you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll try to do our best to answer them. All right, so let's get started. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna give kind of this brief overview. We'll talk about momentum. We'll talk about a few other things. So what on earth are we going to talk about today in this session? Well, we're going to talk about momentum in terms of the flywheel analogy. For those of you who have read the book Good to Great, this comes up a lot in that book as kind of a theme for momentum and other things within that story. We'll also talk about the effects of compounding, what they mean, what they are, and how to take advantage of those. Similar to momentum, we'll look at contrast compounding and momentum. We'll look at what that means, how to take advantage of those in business and in life, and things like that. And like I just kind of alluded to, we'll talk about some analogies. One of the best ways that helps me learn is through analogies, or stories, or examples, use cases, whatever you may call them, of of things to help you kind of grasp an idea, or help you understand what's happening here. So I'll try to throw in a few of those, and hopefully that helps you guys along the way. So first and foremost, what is momentum? So momentum, in and of itself, if you take the insight from physics, means having some inertia in your activity, right? If we break it down to just fundamental concept, we're talking about physics, and we're talking about um, the things related to Newton's laws of physics, and other things you might hear about in kind of a fundamental, let's say, physics 101 class, right? Inertia, right? So these are kind of basic concepts, but momentum isn't just applicable to physics. It also applies in other areas of our life, and most importantly for us, business, startups, and then things like that as well. So this applies to many things. Now, Sam Altman, former Y Combinator president, once said that one of his top few startup commandments was never let a company lose momentum. And for those of you kind of in the startup game, this hits home for a lot of people. You might have had momentum within a startup in the past, and you might know what that feels like, and what that feels like to have momentum. Things feel easier and whatnot. And so we'll talk about that too. And you also, as compared to that, you also might know the feeling of when you don't have momentum, let's say in the startup space. And so that's what Sam is kind of alluding to here. So to give you guys kind of an analogy of momentum, to give you guys kind of a bigger picture of what that looks like, let's talk about the analogy of let's take a drive. So imagine one of your friends buys a new car, and he wants to take you out for a drive, and show you, show you the ins and outs of his new ride, right? So you get in the car, and he picks you up, he or she picks you up, and you start going through town. And as you go through town, you may hit some stoplights, you may hit some traffic, you may have to make some turns, usual, traversing through, whatever your route is through town. And you hear the engine as it, you accelerate after a stoplight, you hear the brakes as you kind of slow down, as you kind of traverse through town. Now, once you get out of the city, you may notice how, let's say, freely the car accelerates, right? It seems to accelerate a lot easier than it did before. You're already moving, and you're not coming from a complete stop. And so you might, have some intuition as to why that's happening. But why does it seem to accelerate easier, when you're on kind of that open road than before when you were trying to traverse through your route through town, right? And the answer, of course, is momentum. And so this is one of the big drivers as to why, let's say you go and purchase a new car, or you look at cars, and you notice that the highway miles per gallon is a lot higher than city. Well, a lot of that has to do with the momentum that the car is carrying with it, as it traverses through, let's say, an open highway versus the stop and go you might experience in traffic, or with stoplights, stop signs, and things that happen in the city, right? So this is kind of a real world example, or something to hold on to when we talk about momentum. So next, we're going to go into that flywheel analogy that was really popular in the book Good to Great. So imagine this huge flywheel, right? This huge wheel, as pictured here on the right, weighing, let's say it weighs, over 5,000 pounds, some massive, huge wheel. And, you individually, you start pushing it and pushing it. And with great effort, inch by inch, after, let's say, about 3 hours, you're able to turn that wheel once, right? It took you that long just to inch that wheel around and eventually turn it, right? Now, as you keep pushing, that flywheel starts moving faster and faster, and you might notice something is happening along the way. Eventually, you may, after hours or after a long time pushing, you may push no harder than you did before each and every time, but the flywheel seems to go faster, and seems to speed up every time that you push it, even though you're not pushing any harder. So this is kind of that example of momentum that is used in Good to Great in their analogy when talking about business and startups. In the actions and decisions and things that you take each and every day end up pushing that flywheel forward. And then ultimately you get from buildup to breakthrough. Now the flywheel ends up capturing that overall feel inside a company as they gain momentum, right? Things feel easier when you have momentum. Things, conversely, things are a little bit harder when you don't have momentum. Now, when you talk about breakthrough transformations that you might see in companies or startups, they never seem to happen in one fell swoop. If you were to talk to the people involved or the internal members of that team or of that company or startup, it was usually that cumulative process, step by step, action by action, day by day, decision by decision, turning that metaphorical flywheel within the company, right? And eventually, momentum took over, and each and every push got you further than it did previously. Now, often when we talk about media's coverage of a company or of a startup, they don't usually cover the company until the flywheel is already moving, right? That quote unquote 1,000 rotations per minute. And so everything seems really easy, but in reality, it was all that cumulative process that it took to get to that point where you had a quote unquote breakthrough, but in reality, it was just that cumulative process of everything that you put behind that compounding, and eventually the momentum took over and got you to that point. Now, this idea is true not only in business and startups, but also in life in general. It applies to a lot of different things. And knowing that it exists and knowing that it's, part of something around us and real, allows us to be able to take advantage of it in certain situations and use it to our advantage. Now, I want to talk about another analogy when we get into, that buildup and breakthrough idea with momentum. So we'll talk about the story of a chicken and an egg. So picture an egg just kind of sitting there, right? Nothing special about it. It's just an egg. Now, no one really pays much attention to this egg until one day it tends to crack open and out jumps this chicken, right? Whoa, what happened? And then, the news might have some funny news stories saying, something like, oh, this remarkable revolution of the egg. Oh, stunning turnaround, this transformation, right? These are things that we might see, let's say, in sports articles all the time, where these sort of ideas or sort of viewpoints tend to happen a lot of times in the media, in what they quote unquote call breakthrough moments, right? Now, does this sound familiar? You can think about what this means in your life and sort of similarities you might see between this egg and other things that you've experienced. So, what does this mean from the chicken's point of view? Now, we've talked about this from the person outside looking at the egg and what that looked like. But what does this mean in terms of the chicken? Well, while the world tend to ignore that dormant looking egg at first, that chicken was evolving. It was growing. It was developing. It was incubating, right? That cumulative process was moving forward. This whole, time by time, day by day, second by second. This chicken was, incubating and developing within that egg. So from the chicken's point of view, the egg was simply another step, right? The cracking of that egg was just another step in that cumulative process over time. In this long chain of steps that led to that moment. Now yes, it was a big moment, that cracking of the egg, but when you look at it in terms of the perspective of the chicken, it doesn't really seem as radical as it does to somebody outside the egg, right? It was a big moment, but it's a little bit different when you look at it from the other point of view. So this just tells us that sometimes we don't have the whole context of, let's say, a situation looking, from the outside, but in reality, momentum and that cumulative process does play an important role in life and in business. So I'm going to diverge here from talking about just momentum, and we'll talk about the power of compounding per se. And to do that, I'm going to give you another example here to try to hone in this idea. So if you were given a choice, which would you choose? Option one is $3 million cash, or option two, would you choose a penny that doubles in value every day for 31 days, right? So for a month. So I'll give you kind of a few seconds here, but just think about if you were given this choice, what would you choose, right? If you had to choose one or the other. Now, most of us might gravitate towards, one or the other. But if you've heard this before, you already know the answer. So if you have heard this before, you know that ultimately that penny is the better choice. But why is it so hard to believe that that penny is a better choice than just choosing the cold hard cash, right? So we'll talk about the power of compounding and what that means. So, for example, to make this a little more tangible, let's say that you took the cold hard cash, right? So you chose $3 million, and let's say your friend chooses the penny. And what would that look like over time? Now, when you start out, obviously you have $3 million, and your friend has a cent. And as we go along, we get, let's say, 10 days in, right? We're a third of the way through that time almost, and your friend has $5 and you have 3 million. Well, it looks pretty good for you, right? It looks like you've made the right choice. And even 20 days in, right? So we're 2/3 of the way through that 31 days, and you're still, sitting high and mighty with your $3 million, and they're sitting on $5,000, and you say, "Wow, that's I'm doing pretty good. I must have made the right choice." Even day 29 with 2 days left, you're still sitting in a better position. And it isn't until those last 2 days of doubling do you really see the difference in the choices between choosing the cash versus the penny, right? So now in the end, after day 31, the person who chose the penny ends up with over $10 million, and the alternative, you're left with the 3 million. But this example just shows us that even small events over time, if they are compounded, lead to big results. And so, to give you guys something real world in that realm of compounding, we'll talk about something that's happening in the world right now, COVID-19. Now, contagious diseases in and of itself are a great example of compound growth over time. They talk about exponential growth, and they talk about, all these different statistical measures with infectious diseases, because they're really easy to model in that way. Now, this graph shows the state of Wisconsin total confirmed cases of the coronavirus, COVID-19, by date. And as you can see kind of the compounding that takes place over time. On March 9th, there was only two confirmed cases. Even 3 days later, there's only 8. But if you go forward another week and a half, you're sitting at 281, right? And that just happened because of compounding and the modeling that takes place with infectious diseases that we can see through that. So that is kind of a real world example of compounding over time. So when we talk about business and startups, this idea is no different, right? So when we talk about the compound effect, so imagine you're handling your social media for your startup or small business, and let's say you're putting out a few posts, a few videos, or some few pieces of content every week. Month one, let's say that a month from now you're sitting at 10 followers, right, on your Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever it is, right? So you have 10 people that are paying attention to what you're doing. After 3 months, you're sitting at 50 followers, right? Now, by 6 months in, let's say you're sitting at 200. Now, by a year in, that started to compound, right? People that are viewing your content are now recommending, telling their friends about it, and so that's starting to compound and starting to grow, faster than it was before. So after a year down, you're looking at 1,000 followers. By 2 years, now that's 10x to 10,000 followers. And then 3 years, you might be at something like 100,000 followers, right? And so this kind of is a way to view something in the real world in terms of startup and business growth, or attention growth for, let's say, a business, in terms of compounding, right? And so some people refer to this as exponential growth. The improvements start coming slowly, kind of in the beginning, as we saw in month 1, month 2, month 3, all the way up to month 6 and even month 12. But those gains start to increase rapidly over time, right? The gains that they made in the second year were 10 times as much they made in the first, right? So this is kind of just a little example of what that means and what compounding can do. And momentum plays a key part in this too as well, in moving that forward. So when we talk about another thing in real life, so we'll talk about your habits in terms of compounding. So imagine cutting out 125 calories a day from your daily diet. Let's say just a cup of cereal, right? Uh, so you cut out, about a little less than a cup of cereal a day. Now imagine you did this every day for 31 months. So this is, something very, very minuscule in the short term, right? That you might look at in a day and say, okay, I can just eat, a cup less cereal or some, 125 calories less, right? Now imagine you did this for 31 months straight. So a little bit over 2.5 years. Now 31 months is about 940 days. 940 days times about 125 calories a day is a little over 117,000 calories. Now, if you divided that by about 3,500 calories, which is about the calories in 1 pound, over those 2.5 years, you have just lost 33.5 pounds, right? So this is one of the reasons that small habits tend to compound over time when we talk about things like health and lifestyle and things that are applicable just in our everyday lives and things we do every day. So these small habits, like just cutting out a few calories out of your daily diet or doing something within that realm of a lifestyle change, tend to compound over time. So over time, habits tend to compound, momentum builds, and this is a real part of life and in many different ways. You start with things like small weights in the gym, and over time, momentum compounding carry you to new heights, right? It becomes easier for you, and momentum and compounding tend to take over after a certain point. Now, your business may start with a small following now, but through consistency and the momentum you may build, you could build something like a massive audience, similar to the example we showed before. Now, ultimately, you're usually only one moment, one follower, one video, or one post away from a breakthrough, right? So if you're doing a podcast on something like baseball, because that's your huge interest, all it takes is that one MLB executive to watch it. But how do you get to that point? But just like the egg analogy, you owe your success not only to that one breakthrough moment, but also the momentum and the cumulative process that you took to get to there as well. So thank you guys. I hope that kind of sets the stage for Sam a little bit, and hope you guys learned something. So that's the presentation.
Yeah. Thanks, Steven. And just remind everyone, if they have any questions offhand, we're pretty good at it. We have a few mentors online. Just put on the chat any questions you have on any of the concepts or ideas. But yeah, thanks, Steven. Sam, Professor Clarke's been amazing at actually teaching our startups these use cases. Like, how do you apply some of these concepts and stuff like that? And so we thought it would be a good marriage having Steven doing initially first, and then have Sam continuing on a dialogue momentum. You got the floor, Sam.
All right. Let me go ahead. I copied Steven's way, and I made a couple slides. Let's see if I can share.
Nice.
That with you. Of course, I'll play that. The thing that I thought I would talk about a little bit today is just taking some time to talk about how a business is able to capture momentum. Because as a business, you can fail as a startup if you generate a lot of momentum, but you're unable to capture it, right? It's nice that maybe these things are going on, but how do you, as a business, model your company so that you can take advantage of all of the momentum? And so as I was thinking about this week, I remembered from a mentor of mine, a formula that he presented in a book. He was a famous economist. He actually worked with 2 presidencies and wrote a book called Unlimited Wealth. And it's an economic book, not specifically a business book, but the starting point of that book was this formula, which was wealth equals natural resources times technology. And What I would just want to talk about is spend a couple minutes and apply this formula to our approach of capturing momentum. There's some interesting things to think about when we look at this formula. The first thing we can we get to understand a little bit about this, and he explains this in his book a little bit, is that for most generations, technology was a constant, right? That if you were born in the Stone Age, you died in the Stone Age. If you were born in the Bronze Age, you died in the Bronze Age. If you were born in the Iron Age, you died in the Iron Age. We actually define the ages throughout in the past as the technology that was applied to them. And this became very important when we understand how wealth is created, or how we capture kind of wealth, how we capture value that we create from the things that we do, is that technology didn't play a very big role in that process. So wealth and value and those things that we're trying to capture was really defined primarily by the natural resources, the resources you could accumulate as an individual or as an organization or as a country. And we see this all the time, right? In the history books, right? If you didn't have a lot of wealth, what did you do? The only way to generate more wealth in the past was that you went to war with a group of people who had resources. You took those, and that's how you became wealthy. Well, obviously that's changed. We no longer, as you would expect, consider technology to be a constant. Technology changes so rapidly that it has actually probably become one of the primary drivers of wealth creation. You think of the richest people in the world and so forth, and you realize that a lot of their wealth is derived not from accumulation of resources like it was in the past. Think of Bill Gates as a good example, right? Bill Gates is one of the richest people in the world, yet his wealth isn't derived primarily from resources, but from the technology. And sometimes we consider those intellectual properties, but it's the technology that drives a lot of that wealth. Now, I explained this formula a little bit because I want to talk about how we can apply it to capturing value. We generate momentum. We start that process, and you talk about action by action. You do things, and those things will develop and compound over time. And then it's our responsibility to begin thinking about how we're going to effectively capture what we're accomplishing. I think Steven quoted Sam Altman and said, "Never let a company lose momentum." Well, the quickest way to lose your momentum is not having a model that can make it possible to capture it. So they're basically, from this formula, and this kind of a simplified look at it, there's really two ways to capture it. As a startup, you can capture it through using resources or through technology. So if you're generating momentum, some companies will add resources. They'll add personnel, human resources. They'll add people into their company. Other companies might start adding technology. And the idea here is, and some companies will likely do both, right? They'll add resources, human resources, other types of resources, and they'll add technology to capture the value. We've seen this kind of play out in an interesting way over the last couple of years, if you think about it. And it's played very interesting into the future, I think, economic situation that we've put ourselves into, is that over the last about 10 years, really since the last recession and up until the pandemic, our economy's been growing quite rapidly during that time. And as a result, one of the things that we found is over the last several years, we've had record low unemployment. There hasn't been a lot of people unemployed who want a job. And so when we look at this formula, we see that, the resource part has been something that's been probably a challenge for companies if they're looking to capture momentum, right? They're unable to find people to help them do it. And as a result, they're likely instead of hiring people, they purchase technology. Some of these technologies came from startups. We've seen the emergence of things like Slack come into existence, really to improve the performance of the resources a company already has. And so companies spend a lot of time in adding technology to capture this momentum that has been generated in the economy. And so it's kind of an interesting look at it. What does that mean? Well, there's some consequences to that. And as we come through a pandemic, and now we've switched and we have a lot of unemployed people. So in a sense, there's a lot of resources available to these companies. But one of the challenges that will occur, I think, in the future is that because we spent so many years with technology being added to our models, that companies have replaced individuals with technology, and they'll be able to produce the same amount of value with fewer resources. And that's something to think about in all, kind of models, is how does technology replace resources over time? A good example, and one that you always think about, is, for example, the natural resource of oil. Oil used to be worthless. It was a problem. Technology came across, turned it into something of value. But at the same time, that technology has improved over time, that, oil probably at some point in time, I don't know how long it will take, will become a resource that's not that valuable to people, as we replace it with other forms of technology. One other quick example I wanted to share with you, as we're talking about how companies capture momentum, is I wanted to talk a little bit about two companies that are similar and how they capture value in this momentum and rely less on natural resources. And I think this is kind of a pinnacle example of what has changed in how businesses operate. And those two companies would be, for example, Uber and Airbnb. Uber, for example, is the largest transportation company in the world. And they hold, in a sense, no resources, no physical resources. They don't own any of the vehicles that they use to provide their value to their customers. In a sense, they derive their entire value from the technology they create. And that's similar with Airbnb. Airbnb probably has more rooms available, more rental space available than any company in the entire world, yet they own none of that real estate. They derive all their value from the technology. So those are kind of some examples, probably the one end of the spectrum where they're using almost entirely technology to generate value, to capture value for their companies. So what do you need to do as a startup? You really should seriously consider how your business model will capture value that you're creating as you do these things over and over again, these actions that lead to momentum that compound over time. How does your business model evolve to make sure that you don't ever lose that momentum? Is it something that you incorporate a lot of technology into? Is it something that you add resources into, or is it somehow use both? Obviously, we talk a lot about technology in this tech school, so we are always trying to look at technology as an important part of your business model. I look at kind of two ways in the end, though. I look at as part of how do we create efficiencies and how do we create scale. When we assume that, assume these lines are just your business model, what you'll realize is that as people enter into your business model, they're going to go through various steps along the way. And as a startup, what you're going to realize is there's a lot of inefficiencies in those steps. There's something that you have to do that takes more time than it should, or more money than it should. And as a result, there's some inefficiencies built in your business model. And so as you generate momentum, those inefficiencies can break your systems, can break you down, cause a lot of failure with your business. And you want to avoid those. And so what you quickly need to do when you're evaluating your business model is start to identify inefficiencies and decide how you're going to fix them. Are you going to fix them with technology, or are you going to fix them with people or other types of resources? I had an uncle who was, worked in he was an HR manager, two different companies. One company, They focused on those technology solutions because they were lean as a business, and they needed to find the best, the most, the least expensive way to solve problems. And then there was another version where they had lots of money and they throw money at problems. Just hire some people. You guys are likely to fall into that lean category, right? As a startup, you're not going to have money necessarily that you can just throw at problems and say, hey, we can just hire people, make this work. You're likely to fall in the category where you're going to need to find inexpensive ways, and those tools and technologies will help you increase efficiency. Once you have an efficient business model, then you talk about scale. And this is where we kind of go to that compounding and momentum of your business. You've captured the value. Now you're gonna translate that into its own momentum, its own scale. And so scale is about repeating efficient business models over and over. So as you grow in potential customers, you're able to again take advantage of all of that. So think about your business model, how you can implement resources or technology, make it efficient, and then scale. All right, I'll stop there and see if you guys have some questions.
Yeah, no, and offhand, Professor Clarke and Steve, I had some questions from other startups that couldn't make it, so I have some of those ones. But just for everyone who's online, yeah, you definitely can add on chat some of your questions. Sam, I did like how you kind of tied in one of the questions for the startup is like, how can we apply some of these as a startup? That was one. I think you did talk about Uber and you talked about Airbnb. Do you have any other examples offhand? And that's open for you, Sam, or Steven.
Well, I think you're going to look at most startups today and realize that they're going to rely heavily on technology to make their business model operate, right? I think that's one of the challenges that we have going forward from an economic from our economy standpoint is we have a lot of people who are going to need jobs, but at the same time, technology improves so quickly that we just need less and less of resources, right? And I think of Zoom, for example, right? How does that just transformed our workplace? We're sitting here on a Zoom conference call. And what does that mean in terms of, in the past, you might have, as a company, you could implement Zoom and suddenly, the amount of time and money and energy needed to spend to do certain jobs, sales, for example, has gone down quite a bit. So I think you could probably find an example in each company where technology is becoming an important way to capture their growth.
That's great. That's good. Steve, you have any feedback on that? Any other examples you would think about? I know you did some really good examples too, even on the social media side.
I would say another example you could think about is when you think about the auto industry, think about what Tesla's been able to do because of their technology, right? As opposed to, so we have the emergence of, let's say, electric vehicle technology, and now Tesla's obviously been kind of a front runner in developing that and pushing forward that technology. Well, if you compare them to, let's say, like a Ford, right? So Ford, of course, 100 years ago, they pioneered, the assembly line, right? They had the most innovative technology at the time. Now, technology is now moving so fast that, when it comes to something like, let's say, electric vehicle technology, when you look at the approaches between, let's say, the two companies, you have Tesla where they're investing in, let's say, resources like personnel and really trying to push forward that technology as hard as they can, versus if you were to look at the approach Ford had, which was, we're going to invest like a few $1 billion in this and just throw money at it, right? Which kind of ties into, what Sam just said, in terms of how do you push those levers and things you might do along the way. So there's another real world example of how to, push wealth based on resources and how to capture that momentum.
That's great. And I definitely love your example about with Sam Alton and Y Combinator about like, I remember him always saying being a startup or even being just in career wise, it's like a momentum game. So like you use that other quote. Another question too is like you guys have been talking about a lot more with the pros of momentum. Is there any cons you guys see on having momentum? This is maybe regulated to maybe just a startup too.
Well, like I was just saying, there's a risk to gaining momentum too quickly and not being able to fulfill it, right? If you're a business in a business setting, as a personal or social media, if you're doing something in terms of your own personal branding and things like that, it might be a little bit easier. But I always, you have the funny story of, for example, Instagram that started off their company and they launched Instagram, and I can't remember like the number, but it seemed like it was millions of people signed up in the first 24 hours. I don't know if you guys remember the exact number, but it was some huge amount, and their server kept crashing, right? And they thought, this is going to be the end of us. We gained so much momentum so quickly, but we didn't put in any part of our model the way to capture it in this situation. They were saved. They admit that they were probably saved by one thing, and that was that people blamed their cellular networks, not Instagram,
Nice.
for the failure of the server, right? Because they kept trying to upload pictures and it would come back as an error, right? And they just, it was an early enough time in the history of mobile technology, mobile internet services, that they assumed that it was AT&T Sprint or something that was causing all the problems uploading pictures, not the fact that every time their server was just crashing over and over. And they spent the next few months trying to fix all those problems before anybody would know that was a problem. And I think that could be a downfall of a startup is you can gain momentum too fast, right? You can grow so fast that your model can't keep up. So just keep that in mind. It's a nice problem to have, I would say, if you're growing too fast that your model can't keep up, but it also can be very painful.
No, that's great. I like the Instagram story. I don't remember the number either, Sam, but we'll do some fact finding after tech school. Steven, you want to add anything on maybe what a con could be on a group having too much momentum? Or
I'd just say, Sam brought up some great examples of this. Just to echo kind of what he said, a con could be, when you gain that momentum, not having the technology to back it up. I mean, Sam mentioned, Instagram and their servers, right? And sometimes, as luck would have it, or as circumstance would have it, you're able to avoid those situations or mitigate those risks, right? Like he said, they were early enough in mobile technologies to where, the candidate for the problem was looked on as AT&T or Verizon or whatever versus Instagram. But in some cases, kind of like Sam alluded to, you gain all that momentum, and if your technology isn't there to back it up, or resources or what have you, then that can be really devastating and create a very negative image for your startup or company, right? That now you have to deal with the repercussions of that happening. So that's all I would mention on that.
I have one other thing that I wrote down a little note when Steven was talking, and I thought it's also important to remember that yes, momentum is gained action by action, right? That idea of compounding, doing things over and over. But what you don't want to do is, if you're not gaining any momentum, you got to go back and evaluate what actions you're taking. Are you actually doing something that people, are responding to? Because another bad thing would happen is if, let's just say you're posting articles and you're doing it over and over and over again, and there's some diminishing return to what you're doing, right? You got to figure out why that diminishing return happened. What's causing the failure for that exponential growth? So, I think that the lean startup book talks a little about, that's an important part of measuring, because you want to figure out where you're having diminishing returns so that you can maybe get rid of those actions. Those are things that take time or money, and they're not providing any additional benefit to your company. So we measure those and we remove those, or we pivot or we change. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs sometimes have a difficult time. They just think, if I keep doing it, at some point in time, it's going to happen, right? We're going to hit that breakthrough point. But they're not carefully measuring for diminishing returns and making changes and things to how they're attacking the problems.
Oh yeah, that's great feedback, Professor Clarke. I have kind of like what we usually talk about with tech school too. This is one of my last questions is like, what would be some next steps for either a startup or someone going into like the tech industry? Like, what's some next steps that someone can do, either reading a book, or is there an article, or what's some tangible things they can actually do offhand as a startup to gain momentum in their startup? Something practical, like some practicality.
Well, I think the hardest thing that you're going to always have is you got to keep doing. You have to do something every day, for example, right?
Yeah.
But there are some motivational challenges early on that you have to overcome. But it's something that, just doing things all the time is important.
That's great. Even in this climate too, that's been one of the hardest things. I feel like I'm talking to different startups, like just being motivated. But at the same time, certain groups I've been talking to, they've had extra time now, and so they can put that time and that effort to creating that quote unquote momentum and that. So it's been unique seeing how different startups have been thriving. Some have been having issues. Even the bigger companies, they're having the similar issues too. Steven, anything to add on some practical things that maybe a startup or someone going in the tech industry could do to kind of promote this kind of momentum and this method, I guess, mentality?
Sure. Yeah, I know Sam and I have talked about a number of, books and resources throughout these kind of two talks and answering these questions. I think the big thing that I would say, just to help kind of startups navigate that path, especially in tech and other industries, would be, kind of echoing what you and Sam have kind of alluded to, striving for growth, right? So striving to, each day try to, improve, whether that be, learning something new, or, trying to improve, your process, or the resources you have, improve your internal team, improve the technology, whatever. Just try to make that next step in pushing that forward. And one of the ways that you do that sometimes is very tough and challenging your own internal beliefs, right? Because in order for you to grow and in order for you to improve, sometimes you have to challenge your current understanding, in order to find, maybe where that falls short or where that can improve. And sometimes that's the hardest part.
That's great. Yeah, I think the startups will like all those answers. That's good. Well, thank you both. I always kind of give you guys a little any other parting thoughts, and then we'll end. I'll start with you, Steven. Anything last?
No, I don't really have any other parting thoughts other than, for those of you listening, for those of you, tuning in on YouTube or whatever medium it might be, I hope that you guys learned something today. I hope you guys walk away from today, with some insight or some questions or some curiosity that you might not have had before. And if you guys, have further questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out and we can always do our best to answer them.
Yeah, I've been saying even just an email, if you just hello@Fokcus, that totally would be fine. I like, hey, thanks, Chris, for, he gave a little shout out. He said thanks for coming on. Chris, part one of our cohorts. Sam, any parting thoughts to?
Well, I think that I would say that you should like and follow Fokcus.
Yeah, nice, good call. I like that one. A little momentum there.
Yeah, gain some little momentum there. Anyway,
Yeah.
So thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
that's great. Sunny's getting out. Stuart said thank you too. Yeah, I think it was a good group. Great talk. And I'm always learning stuff too. Thanks for all the data, Steven, and Sam. Thanks for all your unique thoughts. I love the actual little graph that you actually have. There's a couple graphs I might have to screenshot. We could post those. Those are great. And next week we're gonna have actually a couple of things that we're thinking about. We're gonna do dealing maybe with tools and teams and how you kind of keep with some of this kind of thought about momentum, what that looks like. So I'll look out for that post. And thank you guys. Thanks, Steven. Thanks, Sam. Thanks everybody for coming. And talk to you later.